So I'm gonna just read briefly.
Good.
Fred Hampton held the microphone in his right hand and looked out at the crowd. "I'm free," he began in a loud voice, then repeated it. People shouted their approval. His voice got softer. "I went down to the prison in Menard, thinking we were the vanguard. But down there, I got down on my knees and I listened and learned from the people. I went down to the valley and picked up the beat of the people. A drum beat started and everyone clapped to the rhythm. Fred chanted, a cross between a Baptist preacher and Sly and the Family Stone, 'I'm high,' making each high into a two-syllable word. He sang, I'm high off the people." And then chanted the words again. It was impossible for me not to join in, and soon I clapped and stomped with everybody else. Then he went on, after giving the power to the people and X power to those we left out, he went ahead and said, "If you ever think about me and you ain't going to do no revolutionary act, forget about me. I don't want myself on your mind. If you're not going to work for the people, if you're asked to make a commitment at the age of 20, and you say, I don't want to make a commitment at the age of 20 only because of the reason I'm too young to die, I want to live a little longer, then you're dead already. You have to understand that people have to pay a price for peace. If you dare to struggle, you dare to win. If you dare not struggle, then damn it, you don't deserve to win. Let me say peace to you if you're willing to fight for it." And I think that gives you a sense of how powerful Fred was. And later on in the speech, he said some things that people remembered later on. He said, "I believe I was born not to die in a car wreck or slipping on a piece of ice or of a bad heart, but I'm going to be able to die doing the things I was born for. I believe I'm going to die high off the people. I believe that I'm going to be able to die as a revolutionary in the international proletarian struggle. And I hope that each of you will be able to die in the international revolutionary proletarian struggle, or you'll be able to live in it. And I think that struggle's going to come. Why don't you live for the people? Why don't you struggle for the people? Why don't you die for the people?" Fred finished. Everyone stood and applauded again, unaware of the truth of his prophecy. We chanted, "Free Fred Hampton," and the church reverberated with the clapping and stamping of feet.
He was something else. You are listening to Live from the Heartland. We're brought to you every Saturday morning on WLUW 88.7, Chicago Sound Alliance. And I am talking with lawyer Jeffrey Haas, and he is the author of the new book, The Assassination of Fred Hampton, How the FBI and the Chicago Police Murdered a Black Panther. Jeffrey, from the time Fred got out of Menard and was at that rally at the People's Church on Ashland Avenue up to December 4th when he was assassinated in his bed, drugged by an informant, can you there was a lot of activity. There was a lot of action. There was a lot of there were shootouts, there were arrests, there were demonstrations. The People's Law Office came into being. Talk about those few months.
It was August of 1969, and we opened our doors on Halstead Street at the People's Law Office. Meanwhile, the Young Lords was forming in the same neighborhood of Lincoln Park. The police, they turned from a street gang to a political organization, particularly fighting gentrification and the exclusion or expulsion of Puerto Ricans from Lincoln Park. Cha-Cha Jimenez, who was one of the founders, was getting arrested every other day by the police. The Young Lords were in a coalition with the Panthers. So was another group called the Young Patriots, which was an organization of whites from the South, and so was Rising Up Angry. And what this first Rainbow Coalition was really the Panthers and Rising Up Angry, the Young Patriots, and the Young Lords. And I was actually involved in a low-income housing project that this coalition had put together. And because I'd done some low-income housing work at Legal Aid, I was working on that. You had a splits in SDS, and the Weather faction took over the national office. They declared a Days of Rage for October. And the other faction of SDS also marched through the streets of Chicago in October. So you had a great deal. And then you had the conspiracy trial starting. And the whole world, as I said, was focused And Fred was leading the demonstrations outside the conspiracy trial, where inside Bobby Seale was being bound and gagged on the order of the judge. It's hard to imagine looking back, and then of course the anti-war movement was very much at a peak. In 1967, I went on a march. Dr. King led a march downtown, and it was his first time when he came out against the war in Vietnam and said that black people who had been oppressed by this system, not only, even though some other organizations said, well, blacks benefit from war, they get jobs that they couldn't normally get. And Dr. King said, because we have been oppressed, we have a special obligation to not oppress other people, and we can't join in this war against the Vietnamese. Muhammad Ali had said it a little more straightforwardly a few years earlier when he said, no Viet Cong ever called me nigger. And so he had come out against the war early on. And Fred came out against the war, burned his draft card, and early on said, I'm not going to go fight in this war.
And Dr. King, too. I remember that demonstration, or it was a rally at the Coliseum, and there was Dr. King. I was a speaker for the SDS kind, and we had Dr. Spock was there, Emerald Mazie from the United Auto Workers. That was a hell of a rally.
It was an exciting time because you saw the anti-war movement and large segments of the civil rights movement coming together. And while this was going on, and unbeknownst to us, J. Edgar Hoover was starting a program called COINTELPRO, which was a direct effort to destroy the entire movement, the entire left. It focused on the black movement and on the Black Panthers in particular. So while we were coming together, I think this was Hoover's greatest nightmare, and he also saw the Panthers as as he called it, the greatest threat to the security of this country.
You put together, along with an Ichabod Crane-looking figure that is how you describe Dennis. I got to say, I've used the same description. Dennis was my lawyer from some bust I had at the time. Skip Andrews was around. Talk a little bit about how the People's Law Office coming together, and then we're going to get into the really sad events of December 4th.
Well, most of us were working at Legal Aid. Skip Andrew and Don Stang had special fellowships, Reginald Heber Smith fellowships to Legal Aid. Two young law students by the name of Flint Taylor and Siva Dubar were also working with them. I was working at Legal Assistance at that time, working with black community organizations. And the night Dr. King was killed, and there was rioting on the west side, and the police were picking up basically anybody on the streets, I decided I would go to a mass arrest court and defend some of these young men. I'd never been in a criminal court. And when I got down there, as Michael said, there was this gaunt-looking guy, corduroy jacket, leather elbow patches, and I was looking at this guy, and he's up there arguing why these kids should be out on bond. And I looked at this guy, I didn't know who he was, and I figured maybe he's a hustler lawyer trying to get some clients, And it turned out to be Dennis Cunningham. And Dennis and I met that night, and we were the two lawyers down there trying to get bail for some of these kids, most of whom were picked up just because they were on the street. And the judge wasn't going to let them out unless they could show they had a family and they had school and they had no record. And then in a few instances, they got let out. But that started my relationship with Dennis, which continues until today, and we're still close friends. So a few months later, when Dennis and Don and Skip and Flint said, let's start, as legal aid lawyers, we couldn't represent the movement. We were not allowed to go into criminal court. We were limited to civil work. So we couldn't represent Michael James, and we couldn't represent the Young Lords or Cha-Cha. So we really started the office so we could be lawyers for the movement. And we started on Halstead, Webster and Halstead, and believe it or not, at that time, that was a working class community. It was a multinational community. And so the forces, we came together, and a lot happened between when we opened our doors in August and December.